A couple days ago, I saw an article from Fox News that was talking about California's plan to try and ban all gasoline powered vehicles by the year 2035. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that specific article today, but it got me thinking more on the issue of climate change and global warming in general. And I'm going to be honest, I am not well educated on the deeper research and studies that have been done by universities and by scientists, but I do think that there are some very basic observations that can kind of help put the whole climate change issue into perspective. And for me, it has never really been about, is global warming happening? Is climate change happening? I have always kind of accepted that there are going to be changes to our planet, to our environment, to our world, whether it's for more natural reasons or because of human influence. Regardless, I just always kind of accepted that. And throughout history, obviously, our planet has gone through a wide variety of different climate changes over thousands of years. And so to me, is climate change happening? Is global warming happening? That was never really the question. But I think sometimes that's the only question people ask. And so they ask themselves, is climate change happening? Is global warming happening? And if the answer is yes, that means that they should automatically fall into a state of alarmism, which I don't necessarily think is necessary, especially because that initial question of, is climate change happening? Is global warming happening? That should not be the only question that we ask. To me, I think that there are a handful of other questions that should also be asked. For example, to what extent is it happening? Can we do anything about it? And what do we have to sacrifice in order to make change? And I think that last one in particular is really important because if you track down some of the numbers, it's not like the United States is the largest contributor to some of these issues. If you go look at the numbers on the EPA website, America is second in emissions behind China, but I think it's also fair to point out that China has twice the carbon footprint of the United States. The World Population Review says, quote, it is estimated that anywhere from 4.8 to 12.7 million metric tons of plastic enter the ocean each year, but a 2017 study found that 80% of mismanaged plastic in the ocean came from just 5 Asian countries: China, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. An updated study released in 2021 found similar results. I have never thought that the United States and the West in general should do nothing about climate change or ocean pollution or anything like that. But we are not in some circumstances, we are not the primary contributors to these problems. I mean, we definitely have a lot of impact based upon our population, but when you see the impact that Asia has on the carbon footprint, when you see the impact they have on ocean pollution, should we sacrifice everything to compensate for what other countries are doing? How much should we sacrifice in order to compensate for what other countries are doing? Because if these other countries simply refuse to hold up their end of the bargain, if they simply refuse to dedicate the proper amount of resources to combating these issues, does that mean that the whole burden, all of the burden falls on us and we have to sacrifice everything in order to fix these problems? And I understand that I'm sure China would say that they're trying to fix things, that things are trying to get better. I'd be kind of skeptical of the things that China would say about their own air quality and about the changes they're making to combat the CO2 emissions and the atmosphere, I'd be kind of skeptical on that. But at the end of the day, do we think that they are going to put forth the necessary effort to make the changes that we want to see? I don't know. I don't know. But we should not leave ourselves in a bad place economically by making so many changes to combat what other countries are doing that we leave ourselves vulnerable in a number of different ways. And another problem that I have with the idea of climate change and global warming and all of the things that come along with it, all of the input, all of the things that the government might want to do, that the researchers might want to do, or what scientists would suggest that we do, is that other guesses and other predictions throughout history have been made about the state of the world, and they have been wrong. For example, Paul Ehrlich, who is a Stanford University professor and conservation biologist, famously known for writing The Population Bomb, predicted that hundreds of millions of people would starve to death in the 1970s. That was obviously untrue. Now, usually what people say in this situation is, well, our science, our research, our methods are far superior to the methods that we had back then, which is true. But such is the case for every generation. Such is the case for all science. Of course, science 100 years from now is going to be better than the science now. Of course, science now is better than the science was 100 years prior. But that doesn't mean that we have to wholesale buy in to what the experts are saying, because the experts at times have been wrong. And I am especially not a fan of, as soon as a new prediction comes out or a new study comes out, that you should immediately fall into this pit of alarmism where there is somewhat of an extremist element to this, where as soon as you gain more info, you just completely go off the rails about all of the things that are wrong and all of the things that we need to change and do whatever it takes. I am fine with new information. I am fine with new research. I am fine with new predictions. I'm not saying that they are totally useless. But what I'm saying is that they have to be taken with a grain of salt, and more research, other forms of research, do have to be coupled with those initial predictions. Otherwise, we're just going to be spinning our wheels as to what to do. If the predictions are changing and the predictions of the past are wrong, we're just going to be spinning our wheels. Like, what do we do? What are we actually trying to accomplish? If the predictions are wrong, we don't know what we're trying to accomplish because we don't know what the end game is. We don't know, therefore, we don't know what kind of goals we should set for ourselves in order to combat what could potentially happen. And there is a certain element of viability here. Going back to what I was saying about that article, California wants to ban all gas-powered vehicles by the year 2035. How viable is that for people who are on a lower rung economically? How viable is that for people in the lower class? Like, electric cars are more expensive than gas-powered vehicles. What does that mean for them? What kind of situation does that put them in economically? Again, how far should we go? How far should we push the lower and middle classes? And you look at some of the things that are happening in Europe right now with the protests, the farmer protests that are going on. You have countries in Europe implementing these regulations that are stifling the success of agriculture in Europe. And it doesn't really make sense to me that they would say, well, we're trying to change the environment, we're trying to change the climate, we're trying to help the planet so it can sustain itself. It's like, well, wouldn't the production of food kind of be high up on the list? Wouldn't the amount of food we're able to produce as a species, as human beings, wouldn't that be kind of important? Why would we stifle that? Why would we kick the legs out underneath our agricultural production in order to help the planet? Right? And I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying that nothing should be done, but I'm just saying it's like, what's the viability of all of this? What are the priorities of all this? To me, it's like making sure people are fed, making sure people have food. That's kind of towards the top, if you think about it for more than 2 seconds. But there does seem to be an underlying idea that we're going to fight climate change and we're going to fight global warming. And one of the ways that we are going to do that is in the way we're going to do that is by somewhat crushing the lower and middle class. Right? Well, we're going to make everybody buy electric vehicles. And what does that mean for people economically? We're going to stifle the production of hardworking lower class and middle class farmers. We're going to put them in very difficult situations in order to fight climate change. And I'm sorry, but I am not in favor of burying the lower and middle class financially just to keep the ocean level from rising 3 feet over the next 100 years. I kind of feel like that we can, I kind of feel like we'll be okay if the ocean comes in 3 feet over the course of a century. And going back to what I was talking about earlier with Paul Ehrlich's prediction, the reason why that didn't happen was because with the increase of human beings of the planet also comes an increase in the amount of ideas that are out there, the amount of minds you could put towards a problem, the amount of information you can put towards a problem. I do think that as time goes on, as technology progresses, there is a chance that a viable, consistent, and less costly, smarter option will present itself with human ingenuity in the forefront. It's like, why do we have to curb human ingenuity in order to fight climate change and global warming? Like, to me, if human ingenuity is able to increase, then we should be able to rely on that being an option. Like, an option is going to present itself. Like, I'm not, again, for the 100th time, not saying we shouldn't do anything. But I do think that a viable solution is out there. I do believe that it can and potentially will reveal itself once we have a more firm understanding about what's going on. And I would encourage people that are listening to do research, to look at what it's happening, look at the numbers, look at the data, and don't fall into that pit of alarmism, because ultimately I think it blinds people. That fear, there is a certain amount of fear, and this is something that I talked about during COVID, is that people during COVID were, when it comes to wearing a mask and getting vaccinated and the way that people acted, they were letting fear lead them. And I'm not anti-COVID vaccine. I'm not necessarily anti-mask. I mean, I wore a mask at work when I had to. But I am not for this, let's be led by fear and let's let all of our discussions, all of our decision making, and every part of our lifestyle be dictated by the fear of what may or may not happen in the future. That's not a good way to live. That is, it's a good way for people to make bad decisions. And what we're seeing now in response to a certain amount of maybe fear mongering is countries, governments, people making bad decisions.